Yo, what's going on, everyone? I want to talk to you guys about stages, and I want to tier list the stages today. And I want to do that in 3 different ways to show you how the way we construct our tier lists can inform the way we think about our stages or about the ideas that we talk about. The 3 ways I want to tier list the stages are: number 1, the balance or overall health of the stages for the whole cast; 2, how much I like playing on them; and 3, how much stage RNG impacts the gameplay, which is how we might be thinking about banning stages in the future. So let's go ahead and just get right into it. We want to be tier listing these stages. We're going to start off with tier listing stages for what's most balanced overall for the game. And to do that, we're going to start with Yoshi's Story. I think a stage a lot of people like, and I think for good reason. I put it in A tier. I think it is a solid stage. It's much, much harder to camp here than other stages. You can still do it a little bit with platforms and lasers and things like that, but you get a lot less chances. It's a lot harder to run away. This is some lower tiers' best stage. Ganon, Bowser like this stage, at least relatively speaking. And this stage was actually so popular that Drug Fox, a popular coach in the community now, but a more popular player in the past, turned this into a format that Summit picked up for an event called Sammy Singles. Sammy is Drug Fox's name, and it was about playing entirely on Yoshi's Story. So there is this idea of Yoshi's kind of being this ideal stage that some people do think of and believe it's the healthiest one for the game. I'm not entirely convinced. This is not an S tier for me. It's an A tier stage. Some low tiers may have a bit of a hard time, like Roy using aerials when they hit their opponent onto a platform. Roy's aerials, everyone knows, don't really give a lot of knockback, so his combos could just end even if he gets a clean opening. So while the stage is great that you can't really camp someone out, which is a huge problem for a lot of low tiers, and the blast zones are close, meaning it's easier to get kills, so you don't have to worry about recovering or edge guarding, which can be a lot harder for some of these low tiers. There is still a bit of the issue with the combo interruption. So there, while the stage is really, really good for balance, there may be a little room for improvement, but very, very solid stage. I can see why it was picked for this event. Now let's move on to a controversial pick. Let's move on to Battlefield. I think this is the stage that people most often say is the best balanced stage for the game. I would disagree with that personally. I would put Battlefield in B tier. B for Battlefield, if you'll excuse me. While you don't normally see in high-profile matches these days a lot of excessive camping going on, there have been examples of it. For example, West Balls versus Armada. West Balls can use the top platform very well, and it's very hard for Peach to contend with it. So the possibility of that is there because of the high top platform and how difficult it is for low mobility characters like Peach or Puff. Even though they're very strong characters, they have a hard time getting up there to really threaten characters that have greater mobility, or even just a little more mobility than they do. And this is not me saying that defense is wrong, that playing it safe is wrong, or anything like that. To be clear, defense is a great strategy, and I'm glad it's part of Melee, and I'm glad that, we aren't just having all rush down or anything like that. But if you have such a strong position that, say Armada doesn't feel like he can really approach, then that, despite Peach being a pretty strong character, then that indicates that the stage may be causing some issues, even if it normally isn't. And, we might see it in some other matchups as well. In fact, we actually saw H-Box and Armada often go very, very long on this stage for similar reasons. Very hard for Puff to catch Fox. And so kind of the reverse was happening there with Armada having the mobility and H-Box not having it. Again, the reason for this is the platforms are very long, high off the ground, so the character with less mobility has to spend more time getting there, giving the other character a chance to either hit them or move away in a way that's kind of hard for the slower character to get around. So that's my take on that. Again, still a pretty solid stage overall. It is in B tier, which means, a lot of characters can overcome it. It's not impossible. It's not like Hyrule Temple or anything. And I think there's a reason you don't see that extended camping a lot, partly, due to the community, but partly because it is still fairly difficult to do. But the fact that the stage can allow for that means it's probably not the healthiest for game balance, in my view. Now let's move on to Frozen Pokemon Stadium. I've split Frozen and Unfrozen because, again, we're seeing a lot of both of these variations right now. Frozen Pokemon Stadium, I put it in A, maybe A minus, but it's a very solid stage for similar reasons to Yoshi's Story. It's got a long bottom platform, long bottom part of the stage. In fact, it's the longest bottom part of any of our legal stages. It does have two little platforms. There's no top one, so that means of course you couldn't really camp that way, but if you're playing Fox against Ganon, we'll use Ganon again as an example. Fox is going to have a lot of chances to back up, see if Ganon wants to make a commitment, but otherwise take a lot of damage with those lasers. So again, really, really good stage because there isn't really a great way to retreat. If Ganon does get the Fox cornered, Fox is in a tough spot, right? You still get a lot of chances to get outplayed, and the Fox gets a lot of chances to mess you up. And so, and also for these platforms on the side, they won't interrupt combos as much as Yoshi's Story, but they might still do it a little bit, and you can't tech roll as far, so that is a bit of a point in Frozen Stadium's favor. So again, it's around the value of Yoshi's Story, I would say. It just hurts the lower mobility characters a little bit more, which I do think is a meaningful issue. Yeah, it could be A minus just because of the mobility thing, which Yoshi's Story doesn't really have because everything is more condensed. But they are similar. They have different pros and cons for their game balance. But of course, now moving on to Unfrozen Pokemon Stadium, I am looking at a B minus here. No surprise that it's in a very different tier. It's basically the same stage as Frozen Stadium. But then the problems of the stage when it transforms, I'm sure many of you are all pretty aware of it, but the stages, especially the fire and ground or earth transformations, are going to make it so Fox can infinite you. You can be attacked from more angles, even on all the transformations, but again, especially the Earth one, you can be attacked from a lot of different angles. Characters with faster mobility can overwhelm others a little more here. Even on the other transformations, though, even on the water and grass ones, you might have other platforms that break your combos a little more. The windmill could break your combos a little bit more than you would have on Unfrozen Stadium. So that could be a problem for some characters. These don't always impact the match that much, though. You can just wait out the more problematic transformations via the respawn platform or just waiting on one of the sides. So I didn't put this any lower because it is pretty dependent. It's not as extreme. It's not the problems occur every single match necessarily either. So it didn't feel fair to put it any lower. Again, when we're thinking of stages that might be like an F tier, we think of like Hyrule Temple. We'd be thinking about Icicle Mountain, things like that, right? And so those stages are going to be more extreme. So again, Unfrozen Stadium in B minus. It's kind of on the line if you wanted to say it's in C. Not going to hurt my feelings. I was kind of back and forth on this next stage. I'm not really sure what the reception of this is going to be. I thought about this one the most of everything else in all my tiers. I spent the most time thinking about this one. Dreamland is the stage I was thinking about, and I ended up putting this stage in C tier. A little uncomfortable putting this stage in C tier, as I do like all of the stages we currently have, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, what does this stage, doesn't this stage just exaggerate all the problems that I've already talked about even more than Battlefield? It's similar to Battlefield, but the side platforms are even higher off the ground. And now the bottom platform's even wider, so there's even more room to move and run away from someone. And characters are even harder to kill than on Battlefield. And you have a wall to ride that you can tech it. I think this is why you saw Wizrobe top platform camp Hungrybox, and Hungrybox had to resort to planking him in response. This is what it looked like if Hungrybox tried to challenge Wizzy when he was on the top platform. I mean, what is he supposed to do there? If you have an answer, I'd love to hear it. But that didn't seem to me to be the most healthy thing. And people consider Puff to generally be a better character than Falcon right now. So for, a character that many people consider a top tier to be struggling so much on a stage like in that way seems a little strange to me. Doesn't seem necessarily like it would be the most healthy. I know many people do think that Dreamland is Puff's best stage, so maybe this is a strange thing to say, but of course you could replace Wizzy on the top platform versus, another character that doesn't have a projectile, or, some other lower tier, Bowser, Kirby, right? These characters would just not really have a great way to challenge Falcon there, and lots of others too. So this stage can, I think, really cause this issue to be exacerbated more. Again, it's not that, these characters wouldn't lose the matchup anyway, but to have a more non-interactive strategy come out, to have a more almost simplified, easier strategy that is just so overblown to be so hard for these characters to counter come out, it doesn't seem to be the healthiest. Now, even in these situations, it seems like in some cases this can be outplayed. If you really, really, really call out the top tier, you can really call them out. Maybe you can still win it, but it seems even harder on Dreamland than on a lot of the other stages, which is why I haven't dropped Dreamland any lower. But the fact that this is happening among even higher tier characters, and this happens kind of frequently, how often things time out here. Now, of course, sometimes things time out because, it's Peach Puff and they're still fighting, or they're still kind of fighting, and that's a little different. But we're speaking in this case just of characters that are kind of invalidating each other. But in Peach Puff, often one character is just running away from the other character and not really letting the other one get a chance to play, which again is not really something that we necessarily want to encourage. Again, defense is fine if you're in a position that the other character cannot really challenge without it being an incredibly easy punish, and you're basically almost kind of forced into doing it, because if you do anything else, it's like, why would you? This other thing is just so much easier and simpler. That doesn't seem to be the healthiest for the game to me. So it is going to be in C tier for me. I know there are going to be some people that may or may not like this. They may think some stages are worse or better, but this is just based on this criteria. This is where Dreamland would end up. So hopefully you can understand that. Fountain of Dreams, we have in A tier, kind of similar to Yoshi's Story in a lot of ways. While the side platforms, being in certain spots can frustrate a few characters, no one's getting camped here. This is the most compact stage that we play on. It's got the smallest platforms closest to the ground. Sometimes some of them aren't even there, and they're really short. Bottom platform. There's absolutely not going to be anything super degenerate here. I mean, unless you're abusing the ledge, but that's independent of the stage, right? The only reason this wouldn't be an S for me is because some of the platforms may still affect some of the punishes of the weaker characters. You might argue this could be kind of in an A+ situation, A or A+. I just kind of put it in A because it's still really good. I don't really have a big issue with it. Just it might be a little tricky for some of those other characters when someone breaks your combos through a platform or something like that in a way that you really couldn't deal with, but you could if the platform wasn't there. Which leads me to something that may be my most controversial on this list, which is going to be Final Destination FD. I did save this last for a reason. I do think this is A+. It could be even higher, but we're going to talk about this right now. Why is FD so high? Well, even though it's a longer platform on the bottom, you're not really going to be able to camp because you have nowhere else to go up to, and the punish is so much helped at these lower tiers. Roy has a chain grab on Spaceys. There are going to be other punishes that are also not going to be interrupted. There are going to be other characters that so many characters can just launch, Marth and Sheik into the air now, and now they can't air dodge to a platform and get out. Now they can get their juggles in much more easily. Now no one's sliding off their punishes. This is going to be a bit of a nerf in some ways for, characters like Ganon, lower tiers that do rely on platforms. But at the same time, this is also going to make it better for him when he is able to get in. And so again, there isn't the potential for any over-centralizing strategy, and it is going to buff a lot of these weaker characters. It's also going to make it so nerfing the recoveries of, say, Sheik going to a platform or Fox going to a platform is no longer an option. So simplifying that is also going to simplify the edge guard. So there's a lot of ways that this punish gap gets bridged on FD, and the neutral gap gets bridged a little more too. Even though you can get camped out a little bit more, I think the punish gap more than makes up for it, which you could argue is maybe the problem with it. However, maybe you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, sure, you've been talking about these mid tiers and low tiers, but what about the top tiers? Isn't Marth just going to dominate if we had, say FD only or something like that? Well, there are some reasons to think that wouldn't necessarily be true. There are some people in the community that believe that Falcon beats Marth on FD. We've seen Jmook beating Zane with Sheik on FD a lot and causing Zane to counterpick to other stages as a result. And there are even some people that think that Ice Climbers beat Marth on Final Destination. So I think this wouldn't be like an over-centralizing even for the overall meta if this was somehow the only stage. Not that I'm suggesting that. I would never suggest that. I think having a variety of stages is good. But I think this stage, still has interesting merits to it and interesting nuances even among the higher tiers. But this is about this list. This tier list again is what works best for the whole cast. For a video of what might be best for the top tiers, I might make another video on that. We could maybe talk about that if you guys are interested. But I kind of wanted to do something that was a little more streamlined, a little more straightforward, and maybe slightly less controversial. We'll see how that turns out for this one. It does stay out of S tier, kind of. The reason it stays out of S tier, the reason FD, the reason Final Destination stays out of S tier is because there are some matchups that get more lopsided on the stage. Obviously, there's Fox Marth, but Fox versus Captain Falcon gets a lot worse on this stage. Falco versus Captain Falcon gets a lot worse on this stage. Yoshi is a lot weaker on the stage. And then Sheik is generally weaker on the stage too. So there are a lot of characters higher up that do get kind of nerfed. Matchups can get a little more polarized higher up in a way that I don't think happens as much on other stages that does on FD. And so it's not entirely clear if you look just at the higher end that FD would necessarily be as good. But given how great it is for, once you get out of the higher end, how good it is for so many other characters, and there are much more mid tiers and low tiers than there are high tiers in the game, this stage is very beneficial. So it is going to stay out of S tier for me. I put this kind of in A+ because of how much good it does for a lot of weaker characters. It does change some things at the top, but maybe not all of those are perfect. Maybe we could go over that another time, but that is going to be kind of where my tier list is going to be on those stages. Let's move on to something a little bit easier, a little bit harder to argue with, and I'm just going to talk about what my personal tier list is for each of these stages. It's pretty similar, but it's kind of just how fun I find these stages, how much I look forward to playing on them. So again, with Yoshi's Story, we've got A tier. I think it's fun to fight more. There are great offstage plays with Randall and the wall jumps, and the platforms are set up for really fun combos. You have quick shifts between offense and defense on the stage. It can be a little jarring to me, which would be the only reason I wouldn't maybe put it in S, but it's good to have a stage that helps with that. So I don't know. I don't have a problem with the fly guys. They're like, sometimes I don't like them. Sometimes they're fun to hit between stocks. It's a solid stage. It's not necessarily one I always want to play on, but it's a fun stage. I like it. Battlefield for me is going to be a B+. Definitely a solid one too, but I do sometimes have a hard time catching Fox there. Falco has such a great time under the platforms, lasering. Can be really hard to just get to him. And then the top platform, it's not as easy to approach from that. So I have less of an attack angle because there's not that gap between the top platform and the side platform to attack in like you would have on Dreamland. But still, I do like the stage because I get to learn how to play against defense more and also how to use my own defense more. So not a bad stage. Again, B+, pretty good. Like that it exists, like that it tests other things. Good Sheik buff stage, which is always nice. So yeah, solid stage, just not my tippy top favorite. Frozen Stadium's gonna have to be an A tier for me. I think, people like it for a reason. I'm people. There's more room to dash dance, which of course is very fun for me. And it means you can also dash back or play defense more and use the platforms with it. I like, always being a little bit closer to my opponent, interacting with them a little bit more. But, the platforms are small. There's no top platform, so you really can't keep someone away for too long. So I do like that aspect of it. Stadium, it feels like there's an interesting offense defense mix there that's like a little different than how Yoshi's works. So I like that instead of extending itself up to the platforms, it extends itself out. Really fun stage. Unfrozen Stadium's going to be a B+. It's just fine, but when I play against Fox on the stage, Fox is just so good on the rock transformation, and he's so good on the rock transformation that it's just I can't even put it in the same tier. But he's pretty good on the fire one too, which is also kind of tough. If I didn't play Falco, I'm sure I would also not like playing against Falco on at least the rock transformation, but I do play Falco, so it's, not as bad. So that's a little lucky for me. Dreamland, gonna be a B for me, probably for similar reasons as the tiering above, the other tiering. Those long, high platforms in the long stage mean people can SDI away or up and away, and they can break my combos more often. A little harder to catch defensive players in neutral, just with how much room they have to move around. And because of that versus floaty, sometimes it can make it take longer to catch them or to kill them. But of course, that's on me for not hitting my edge guards and things like that. So it's good. I'm glad it exists. I don't hate the stage or anything like that. It just sometimes, if I'm not really on the ball, it's gonna really test me. Fountain of Dreams. I'm putting that in A tier. Fun stage. I like it because there's always that little platform at the top that you or your opponent can use as a breathe or a little reset button. And then you got to kind of quickly go in after that, because it's not really a place you can camp, but you can go there just long enough to you say, okay, what do we do now? Let's do it. So I do like it a lot. The changing platforms means there's always something a little bit different going on and to adjust to. I like that too. I like the change. You can take advantage of it, or you can try to deny it for your opponent. Both of those things I think are pretty fun. So I think it's a really interesting stage, but just sometimes the way it changes doesn't work for me. And so I'm like, oh, how could you do this to me, Fountain? So it's an A. You could probably say it's a little higher, but I enjoy the stage. It's a fun one. And then for Final Destination, I also have this in A for me personally. My characters are both really good here. There's not really any camping that you could really do here. Getting chain grab does kind of suck, so that's why this isn't going to be any higher. And if your opponent puts you in the air, pretty hard to get back down, or if you get cornered, kind of hard to get out of it. But that also means that that stuff's true for you too. So it's very feast or famine on FD, which, is all right. It's kind of that way on Fountain too, just because of how small the stage is, but I don't mind that, because that means, whoever can get that advantage. And so that's kind of fun. It's kind of fun for me. Now let's talk about the last way that I have here to rank the stages, how to tier the stages, which would be how the stages impact the gameplay or how much randomness they have. Now, I would almost argue this is probably the best way to predict what stage gets banned in the future, because the last couple stages we really banned Mute City and Brinstar. I guess you could say Rainbow Cruise is part of that, but those stages but especially those first two, we more so banned them because we didn't want to play against the stage. We didn't want to play against like random things happening. We just wanted to play against the player. So I think that this is an interesting way to look at this and also see make a prediction. Will this be how we decide which stages get banned in the future or which stages get more heat? So again, starting with Yoshi's Story, I'm looking at this as a B. Fly Guys can eat lasers. They can eat a fully charged shot. They can eat cheek needles. And they don't have a set timer, so you can't really play around them. I mean, maybe that gets discovered later, but right now we don't know how to play around them or when to predict them. So they can just get in the way and interrupt things suddenly. Maybe you suddenly hit them and then you're in lag and someone hits you. Of course, Randall isn't random, but he is a unique offstage platform. It moves around. So even if you know where he is, it's a very different experience between Randall and these Fly Guys from other stages, which, maybe some people like, but maybe some people don't like how different that is. And not all these things really impact games all the time, but when they do, they can really add up. And so I'm putting this in B tier because of the fact that it can add up to feel like a very different experience, and some people could feel like it robs them of games. But your average game, maybe it feels more like an A tier. Battlefield, S tier. There's nothing going on. What do I even say? Talking about Frozen Stadium is S tier. You could put it in A tier if you thought the background when it was showing a replay of one of the characters was distracting. Some people have brought that up, so it's kind of just maybe that's like an A plus. We average that out. I just put it in S because I don't think most people really find they're bothered by it, but some do. And on Frozen Stadium, though, I'm putting that in D tier. That is going to be our lowest tiering of any of the stages, and I think this is why you see most people complaining about this. I mean, the stage totally changes the flow of the gameplay, and you might just wait it out, or there might be a character that was losing but is now winning suddenly. Usually a Spacey is getting a larger advantage, so there incentivizes character play, counter picks and things like that in that way too. So I mean that's a pretty enormous impact that the stage has on the game, and it's going to the stage is going to transform frequently, so you're probably going to get one of the stronger transformations even in faster Spacey games usually. Pretty big impacts, even if it's just a momentum breakup, that's still much larger than anything else we have right now, so that is a big impact on the game. So if we're looking at a stage to get band or something like that, that would be the one. There's no surprise we've frozen it, right, for these reasons. Dreamland is going to be an A. Wispy doesn't really seem like he affects matches much. He can have Sheik slide off if she lands on a platform. We see J-Moog using that a lot lately. It could mess up your edge guards if you're trying to space, say, a Marth tipper on someone getting on stage and he pushes you too close, or, you know, he just messes with you a little bit. But generally, it's not going to mess with things too much. The screen shaking a little bit doesn't bother people too much these days. It's not a huge thing, but it will, once in a while, the match will get impacted. So certainly not an S tier in that regard, but it is an A tier. Fountain of Dreams is going to be a C. No surprise, people have been talking about that. The platforms change several times a match, no matter how fast it goes, and they don't always change exactly at the same time either. This can change whether a character can safely camp under a platform, or they can be attacked over it, or even if they can slide off while they're getting hit or not. And despite, you know, these platforms changing slowly and you being able to react to it, it still changes the gameplay, and sometimes it's off screen, the cameras move past it, so you don't know how it's changed. Even if the changes from these platforms are much more minor than what Unfrozen Pokemon Stadium does, it does still change the gameplay much more than Unfrozen Pokemon Stadium. Certainly more than Fly Guys and Randall, as, you know, these are going to be part of every single game, but it's not too extreme. So that's kind of why I put it in C. It's kind of middle of the road, and that's why it's there. Finally, we have FD, which is, of course, S tier. The only reason you wouldn't put it in S tier is there is the possibility of being distracted by the background animations, which a few people have brought up as an issue. So it is possible that FD is like maybe A tier, but I mean, this would be an easy fix if, you know, we wanted to mod it or something. Of course, that might not be a thing we can do in a lot of these Nintendo tournaments, so we might bring that down to an A a little bit, but generally it seems most people are okay with playing around that background. So I feel comfortable putting this in S tier. There's really just not a lot happening with that. And so these are the two stages, Battlefield and FD, that I would suspect would be the hardest to get rid of, because outside of just not liking the stages for whatever reason, you know, there's just none of that extra randomness or anything like that that comes into play on them. So I could see people liking those stages for that reason. And again, we have seen people like Hacks argue for these stages for that reason. But yeah, those are a couple different ways to look at these stages. I'm sure we have some strong feelings about them. Here are the tier lists. Now you can look at them once again. And let me know what you think. Is there another way you want to organize the stages? Is there something that you think I missed, a different way to rank them based on my criteria? I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Thank you so much for listening to this video, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, gamers.